let's give just a minute for people to get lined up, and we'll get started in just another minute. Welcome everybody to the Leaders in Housing Counseling call. This is Bruce Dorr-Palin from the National Housing Resource Center. We have Matthew Goodrow as well from NHRC, and we're ready to start. It's been quite an eventful few days here at NHRC and around the country. So we thought we'd do kind of ask Matthew to give us a kind of rundown on how the midterm elections will affect housing counseling. Look in his crystal political ball. And we've invited Lot Diaz from the National Council of La Raza to talk about some of the issues. Lots on the board, and we have a number of kind of NHRC breaking things happening that I think are pretty interesting. Would love to get your feedback on. Lot got called onto a call with the Senate Banking Committee, and so he will hopefully be able to join us late, and we may move the agenda around a little bit to accommodate that. If not, I'll run through the pieces on my own. You know, we talked about a little bit about the Leaders in Housing Counseling meeting coming up December 11th, and I'm really looking forward to it. We're going to do a lot of important business. There'll be a lot of important people there, including hopefully you. These are great. These will be a lot of fun. They're very interesting, but our goal here is to move the dial forward in our work. So hopefully you're planning on coming, and it would be really helpful if you would make sure to sign up on the SurveyMonkey, and we'll circulate the address again to sign up. And then we've got a webinar coming up on online tools that help nonprofits, and this is the kind of hopefully practical, useful thing. This is done by the FireSpring people, as you may know, very dynamic presentations, but I think there's lots of specifics that come out of it for all of us, so that's all good. And we hope if you haven't already, you're thinking about joining NHRC. Looks like we are really up and running with a members page with some extra resources specifically for NHRC members, and we'll just give you a quick taste of that before the call is over. So let's dive in. So Matthew, okay, so big day for the GOP on Tuesday. What does this all mean for housing counseling?
All right, and I wasn't sure whether to include that cartoon or not. I hope I don't mean to make light of it, but thought we'd put that in there. So just to do a quick recap, so where things stand now, the Democrats have 46 seats in the Senate. The Republicans have 52. There's 2 races that are still to be decided. Those are in Georgia, where there's going to be a runoff a month from today, which looks pretty good for the Republicans, although Mary Landrieu's the incumbent. I may have just said Georgia. It's Louisiana, rather. Mary Landrieu's the incumbent, and she's got a tough race to try to save her seat. And then in Alaska, the Republican has a narrow 8,000 vote lead over the incumbent, who's Democrat Mark Begich. So it's looking good for Republicans in both of those seats. So it's too early to say, but it looks likely that the final count will be 46 seats for the Democrats and 54 for the Republicans. And then folks already know, I'm sure, but the Republicans also picked up at least 9 seats in the House, and they won governorships even in some really heavily Democratic states like Massachusetts and Maryland. So as Bruce said, and everyone already knows, it was a huge sweep for the Republicans. But we want to focus right now on what this is going to mean for housing counseling going forward. You know, this is all based on our best speculation of what it's going to look like, what that dynamic is going to be now that the Republicans will control the House and Senate, and Democrats will obviously still have the White House for the next couple of years. but we'll just try to give you a best idea of what we think it's going to look like going forward. So the first thing to kind of talk about is we still have we're going to have the lame duck session that will be, so the Democrats will continue to have control in the Senate until they head off for the holidays. The really big thing that needs to get done during the lame duck session is obviously the current continuing resolution is set to expire on December 11th. So they're going to need to do something before then to continue funding the government. So there's two options, as there always are with these CRs. One is that they do a short-term CR that just funds the government into the new year, and probably a 2 or 3 month CR to keep the government going until the Republicans take control of the Senate, and then take up funding bills with the new Republican Senate. The other is that they actually pass an actual budget that would fund the government through the rest of the fiscal year. I've actually read conflicting things. My kind of gut is that it seems more likely that they go with the CR, the short-term CR, but I have read some analysis that says they expect them to do a full budget, but it's hard to say where that's going to go. The other kind of big thing that may happen during the lame duck is the tax extenders package. We've talked a lot about the fact that for now it's nearly a year since Mortgage Debt Forgiveness Tax Relief Act expired at the end of last year. We were hearing prior to the elections that everyone was confident that they would get it done during the lame duck. So this would be a package including that, but also including extending a bunch of other tax bills, tax provisions. There was some sentiment that if the Republicans took the Senate, they may put it off until early next year, just into the new Congress, with the idea being, well, the Republicans would may prefer to do that so that they can come in, have the new Congress, and start getting things done immediately, and that should be an easy bill to get passed as soon as it's taken up. So there may be some temptation on their part to hold off on that, just to kind of take credit for getting it done. So we'll keep you posted on that. Everybody thinks that gets done. It's just some question about whether it's in November or just early December or January. So that's the lame duck. Now going forward, there's obviously all kinds of implications for the Republicans now taking over the Senate. I'll just talk about a few of them. First is that the Republicans are going to be chairing committees that are important to us. The committee that we work the most, or the two committees, one of the two committees we work the most with is the Banking Committee. It looks like Richard Shelby is going to, who's a senator from Alabama, is going to take over as the new chair of Senate Banking Committee. He wasn't the ranking member. Mike Crapo has been the ranking member because Shelby has been the ranking member on another committee we'll talk about in a second. But everything I've heard and read suggests that Shelby is going to take the chairmanship of banking. For folks that don't know Shelby, and I know Bruce may want to, Bruce has butted heads with him in the past around Dodd-Frank and some other issues, but he has been very critical of Dodd-Frank and of CFPB, and we would expect that to continue in his chairmanship of the Banking Committee. The other committee, obviously, that's hugely important for Housing Counseling is the Appropriations Committee. So Shelby is the ranking member on the Appropriations Committee now. I mean, it's somewhat surprising that he would choose the chairmanship of the Banking Committee over Appropriations, but it does look like that's what he would do, which would leave Thad Cochran would be next in line to be the new chair of the Senate Banking Committee. I'm sorry, of the Appropriations Committee. The one, I think, small silver lining that we can find here is that for the THUD subcommittee, it looks like Patty Murray will stay on as the ranking member, and Susan Collins will stay on as the chair of the subcommittee. And as folks know, those two have worked really well together, and both have been very supportive of housing counseling. So it looks like, as far as losing chairmanships go, Susan Collins taking over as chair of the THUD subcommittee is as good of news, I think, as we can find. So there is some promise there. So that's the committee chairmanships. Federal funding is obviously a huge issue for everyone. And going forward, Democrats are not going to have any leverage in Congress, so any debates over the budget, any negotiations over the budget are going to be between President Obama, the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, and the soon-to-be Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. So the question is going to be whether Republicans can and will pass a budget that President Obama would be willing to sign. Somewhat promisingly, Mitch McConnell came right out yesterday and said that there was not going to be any shutdowns, there's not going to be a default on the national debt. But then at the same time, we still have the House, which has been and will be more conservative than the Senate, and it's also been less willing to compromise and really has shown more of an appetite for using shutdowns and default as leverage. Folks, I'm sure, remember going into when the last shutdown happened, Speaker Boehner didn't really want it to happen. He just kind of got dragged along by the right wing of his caucus. So it's going to be interesting to see how that dynamic is going to work in between the House and the Senate. There's going to be, those small number of kind of far-right Tea Party folks in the House, I think, are going to be even more emboldened now that the Republicans control the Senate. I think none of the kind of, party leadership is going to want to see a shutdown or, have any brinksmanship even. But it's going to be interesting to see how Boehner especially controls his caucus and to see what happens with that. Another issue is what's going to happen with kind of specific legislation that we're concerned about. That's a lot easier to kind of speculate about than federal funding and these bills that really need to happen. And really the short answer is that very little is going to happen in terms of certainly in terms of major legislation. I mean, there may be some things around the edges, but things like housing finance reform, which is an issue we obviously worked a lot on in the last year or more, that's almost certainly not going to happen. And then other big kind of priorities like immigration reform and things like that seem very likely that there's going to be anything coming out of Congress that President Obama would be willing to sign. And then just one last thing to flag is the CFPB, which Republicans have been attacking since before it was even created, and now that they have even more control, they control the Congress, they're going to continue to do that. Especially we mentioned presumably soon-to-be chair Richard Shelby has been very critical of CFPB. I mean, it's likely the House has regularly passed things that would undermine CFPB. Their main things they would like to get done are changing it from a single director to kind of a board leadership, and putting the funding into the congressional appropriation. They may well pass those things out of the House and Senate, but President Obama certainly won't sign them. But then there are other things they can do. The House has held hearings, and the Senate presumably will do the same thing. And raise all of this just as kind of a note to flag for everyone that we as defenders and supporters of the CFPB will need to really step up and maintain the campaign we've had to be supportive of them and to fight back against the Republican narrative that's in opposition to the CFPB. So those are the things I wanted to highlight. I don't know if there are questions, or Bruce, if you want to add anything. We do have one person that loves the graphics, so we appreciate that.
So, well, a couple things. So I think thinking of very narrowly on just the housing counseling slice of this, so we have actually had pretty good working relationships with the leadership that is involved in our appropriations. So Matthew mentioned Susan Collins, who has been a terrific supporter and has good relationships in CEI, and in Maine and other groups have had good working relationships with her. That's very, very helpful at this moment. And then in the House, we were able to actually get an increase in the from 45 million to 47 million, working with Charlie Dent, who is a moderate Republican but has substantial seniority, and in the Probst committee. So I think these are two things to sort of say, well, these are some bright lights in all this. And I think it does really underscore the importance that we've talked a lot about, I think, but we haven't done a lot about, which is to really develop bigger, better relationships with Republicans and figuring out those places where there's a lot of common ground, and especially around home ownership and financial independence. These are things that we both, I think, where there's opportunities to really have kind of a deeper, better communication and conversation. The other interesting thing I would add is Mitch McConnell. You know, we've seen him at his confrontational best, but I kind of remember him more as somebody who has been willing to, you know, at 1 minute before midnight, reach out and figure out that kind of middle ground compromise that gets everybody through. And as you mentioned, Matthew, about the Republicans need to be able to show that they can govern, that they can produce, now that they have both House and Senate. And so that puts a certain amount of pressure on them to do that. And Mitch McConnell actually is pretty skilled at that place in the world, so worth keeping in mind.
Yeah, I agree. And the Senate, you know, the Senate, I don't expect is going to be, you know, a far tack to the right. I mean, there'll be some changes, obviously, but you know, the Senate traditionally and recently has been the more reasonable body. I think the interesting question will be how the House and Senate now interact. So that'll yet to be determined. There was one question on the Mortgage Debt Forgiveness Act, whether that, if it isn't passed until this next year, whether it'll be retroactive, and the answer is yes, it would be retroactive to January 1st of this year.
Yeah, and the two things to know, one is that the Senate version of the bill actually is for 2 years, so it would take forward. Fortunately, the House version is not, so they have to have a second bill. So somehow that has to get reconciled as well. There is some talk about it not that it not be done in the lame duck if the Republicans really decide they want to show they can produce things, and they might want to kick it over to January so they can show that they're the ones who actually produced it. You know, we hope that's not the situation, but you know, that's a possibility that a few people have mentioned. One last, just you know, as an interesting thing about that did not get a lot of attention in this last election was that there were 5 ballot initiatives on raising the minimum wage to a higher wage, and those passed even in very Republican areas where, I mean, like in Kansas, where the very right-wing candidate was the one who won, and just that some progressive ideas are have transcended the kind of wave of changes. Okay. And so let's, unless there are any other questions, let's move on. Looks like Lot has not been able to join us yet. So I'm going to jump a little bit onto the other things on the agenda, and then we'll come back to Lot's topics, and if you can join us, that'd be great. If not, I'll walk through them because we are deeply involved in these. So December 11th, we're doing our Leaders in Housing Counseling meeting. I hope you're seriously thinking about coming. Some people are there coming because of the NTI training, and that's great. Some people coming because of NFMC. But bless your hearts, I really appreciate all the folks who come just for this meeting. This is a chance for the housing counseling world to get together, large organizations, small, and do some talking among ourselves about what our goals and vision will be, but spend a fair amount of time trying to move the dial forward on critical issues. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the call, but one opportunity is to really get, there's a number of federal agencies that are now doing a lot of work in housing counseling. So Obviously, HUD is doing great work with HAWK and with the Office of Housing Counseling. CFPB on the regulatory side has included housing counseling, and in their educational side, not quite as perfectly as we'd like, but they are including us and promoting us. They've got their own website for how to find a counselor. Treasury's got the HAMP programs, and we'll talk about another initiative we have with Outreach with Treasury, which be interested in what your feedback is on it. And then FHFA is doing is integrating us into the mortgage application, and the new 97% mortgage that they're talking about will have a housing counseling component in it. We're obviously really encouraging that people who are going below 95% have to be counseled, but we'll see what they actually come up with in the end. But there's been a very vibrant working relationship with FHFA. The idea is to coordinate all of these together, and maybe some under a White House initiative, have a more coordinated strategy. And can we use this to elevate and publicize, encourage people to come to counseling, try to really amplify the work we do. So that'll be one of the focus points of the meeting, and we'll have representatives from these groups, and hopefully Seth Wheeler from the White House. And so that'll be a conversation. We have invited Mel Watt, and they're trying to figure out a schedule right now. We'll know in a few days. We did invite the Secretary of HUD, Julian Castro, and we understand that's a bit of a longer shot. We were one of the first to actually get to see him, and they're having a hard time getting all the meetings together, but we're still in play there. We'll figure that out. And we'll also have some resource people who are kind of thinking a little bit outside of the box of what counseling, well, for those people we normally think about in counseling, and how they might challenge us in doing our work. But the real thing about these meetings is that it's a chance for all of us to get together and kind of shape our future a little bit more. So hope that you are planning on coming. It would be great if you would reserve your seat now, and actually make reservations. The DC hotel scene is not as booked up right now, so you can get better deals, and we would like to encourage you to go ahead and do that now, partly because it means that I don't worry so much about it, because I want to make sure that people are going to come and have a good time. Okay, so
I'm just going to jump
in. Yes,
quickly.
Sure.
There was a question about the counselor certification, which I know is still in the front of everyone's minds. Unfortunately, we don't have anything to report on that. HUD, we had expected them to release the final rule by now, but they haven't, and they can't. They're actually prohibited from commenting or saying anything about it while they're still working on that final rule. So there's nothing that we don't have an update to give on that, unfortunately.
Yep, and we certainly keep asking. So appreciate you bringing it up. I think that's exactly right. It's on all of our minds. We are, one of the things we're doing is we're having a series of webinars that are around using social media to strengthen our work. And I think many of you have participated with FireSpring. That's done a few of these for us. And they've got a good one that we've got coming up on the 17th. And the information's on the screen. That's Eastern time, so adjust it for where you're located. And this one's about using, there's a whole range of resources on online tools. I'll be on it because I know I've got a lot to learn on this. This apparently is one of their more popular ones, and there's a lot of good takeaways on it. So it's available to all, and please feel free to join it. Matthew, after this call, either this afternoon or tomorrow morning, will circulate an email. It's going to follow up, and the link will be in there. The link has already been circulated, but the link will be added there as well. Good. And for NHRC members, one of the things we've done is we've crafted now NHRC pages, so there'll be some specific resources that are, when you're a member, you'll have access to, that we're really just trying to beef up. And people have asked for more of these kind of things, and we're glad to do them. So one is a directory of the funding opportunities in the financial services community, so you can figure out where their opportunities are and what the geographies are and how to get to their the website or whatever the mechanism is for applying. Federal Home Loan Bank has a first-time homebuyer program. It goes under different names, but it's an excellent program, and we set up a directory for you to be able to find those and locate which ones are operating in your states. And similarly, they have one called Affordable Housing Programs that's meant to be lender and community-based organization working jointly together. Could be used for down payment assistance, could be used for other things as well. The local Federal Home Loan Bank sets the priorities, but some of these have been very helpful for home ownership programs. So wanted to make sure that people could figure out easy access to that. And we've started compiling a list of contacts for most servicers. We're working on, and we'd love your help in getting ones that we're missing, but these would include not only how you do the initial entry, but also escalation points. And it's an issue that we get a lot of requests about, and we help individually, but thought this would be a good way to be helpful to groups going forward. So there'll also be the contract for if you want to apply for the discounted credit reports. There's a bunch of other membership benefits. There's some fundraising tools, fundraising guide. There's the N10 online technology group. All of these are resources that you can access as members. And of course, at the December 11th meeting, the morning session will be for members, and we'll have a luncheon, and the regular meeting for everybody starts at 1. So that would, again, be something for members. But always interested in encouraging people to join. We do appreciate this has been a very good year for memberships, and got a lot of new groups to join, and thank you all that have renewed. That's just, we really appreciate that a lot. And you always get a warm little email from me if, once you've joined or renewed. Well, maybe we should, so there's one more thing. Why don't we do the DOJ letter quickly, and then we'll go back to that list. And so one of the controversies around principal reduction, we've made some progress in the settlements to where principal reduction is a bigger part of the resolutions, and some services are doing principal reduction on their own, particularly Ocwen. So these are important opportunities. It's nowhere near as extensive, and obviously we want Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to be doing these. But there's some principal reduction going on, and it turns out that there's been a movement by a group of investors, hedge funds and the like, to really suppress principal reduction even where it's being done now and try to prevent it from happening in the future. And the campaign apparently has taken on a number of different aspects to it. The one that has surfaced that we've seen the most is that in a couple court rulings, I guess in one court ruling, well, I shouldn't say it as a court ruling, what it was investors sued Chase and then got a court-approved settlement, and that court-approved settlement actually limited principal reductions to, I think it was 115% or above the value of the property. And a number of principal reduction programs go lower than that, some as low as 95% LTV, which means that people have much greater ability to get equity, and it does eliminate these shared appreciation programs that go deeper as well. So this is kind of a dangerous and frustrating thing to be in place, because we've got settlements now with Bank of America and Citi, which have principal reduction as a major part of the settlement, and these agreements, and Chase, the Chase one does as well, and these agreements are taking out quite a few loan portfolios that and making them ineligible. So we are jointly working with the other groups. I'm going to write a letter to the Department of Justice, to Eric Holder, and really calling on them to stand strong on principal reduction as part of the settlements, and calling on them to see what they can do to investigate these court-approved settlements and seeing if there's a way to open them back up again or argue that they are in violation of the settlement agreements, or I don't know what the specifics might be, but trying to really both heighten the awareness of the problem and to get DOJ to act, and we're also interested if there are other players that can act as well. So the plan is that next week we'll put out a letter for sign-on, and so keep an eye out for it. We're not going to do it tomorrow because it always seems like putting things out on a Friday doesn't get the kind of attention it needs. So it'll go out on Monday or Tuesday, depending on our schedule. So please feel free to, if it fits into your organization's agenda, to join in signing on that. Okay, so let me start it on this list of issues, and very interested in what people think on these. So one of them is that, as you know, we've talked a lot about how we've been trying to get Treasury to use HAMP monies for doing outreach that would really guide people to local housing counseling groups. And this has been a conversation that's been going on for 3 or 4 years, and looks like on Monday we had a breakthrough, and what Treasury is proposing is a way that doesn't present all the challenges of contracting with Treasury, and but allows still that we can generate business that would go to counseling agencies, things that would be NFMC eligible for payment, and would help get the right people to local counseling agencies. So the idea is that they would sponsor some local events, and that they being Treasury, and that the local counseling groups would be the local sponsors. The local groups would need to find the venue and establish it, and what Treasury would provide is they would do the marketing. So this would be, or they don't have to do all the marketing, but they would do direct mailing to borrowers. They would get servicers to do mailings to their delinquent borrowers, and they would do radio advertising and target it to whatever populations they're working on. Often this is aimed especially at African American markets, at Latino markets, at in some localities at Asian markets, and also at older stations that aim at senior citizens, depending on what the demographic of who we're trying to reach is. I would recommend that whatever coalition of groups does this, that you also work on developing some earned media, which this seems to have a very high return on these. The idea would be that there'd be a call-in capacity, that the call-in number, people would call in, they would know when the event is and what they should bring to the event, but they can call into a centralized number. That number would then distribute to the local groups, depending on the location of where the family is, and what the capacity of the local groups are. And then, I mean, my idea of this is that you don't have to go to the event. You could just go straight to the agency, whichever works best for the family. But the goal is to drive people directly to the counseling agencies for face-to-face counseling wherever possible. The tricky thing here is that Treasury doesn't have a really good way of getting money directly to counseling agencies for them to pay for the marketing. There's all kinds of challenges with contracting with Treasury Department. So this would be a way of getting around some of those issues and still getting the same result, and using things that they have already gotten approval and established as acceptable for what people need to do in the contracting process. So the idea is that there would be a local campaign in different hardest hit locations, and your groups could be part of that campaign to be part of the outreach, and then you'd get a share of the clients as well. So definitely interested in feedback that people have. This is not a done deal. This is an idea that's being floated right now, so it's something worth thinking about. And if people have concerns or issues, good to raise them now. But we're trying to see if we can't figure out how to make this work in a way that would work for lots of local groups. And the idea, and unfortunately, there's no money for counseling. So the way things would get paid for is through NFMC, or if you have some fee-for-service payments from servicers that could complement it. That would be the mechanism. So a second thing we wanted to bring people aware about is that we're beginning to think about if there are a lot of different initiatives going on in the federal government around housing counseling. So congratulations, good work. It's great that all these things are happening. Things like HAWC at HUD and the Office of Housing Counseling, the regulatory changes at CFPB, and they're not always getting it quite right, but CFPB is doing a lot to alert people to counseling, at least in some of their programs, and would love to get them to do more. And they have the locator. Treasury has the programs with HAMP and with counseling, and there'll be some more initiatives. And FHFA is working with us about redesigning the mortgage application. There's at least some conversations going on with them about maybe there's some way to create some sustainable funding, and that they are looking at things like the 97% LTV loan as having a component for housing counseling. So all this stuff and plenty more is out there. Is there a way to start weaving this all together into a more unified federal strategy that promotes housing counseling and I think does a couple things. So one would be that in the agencies that there's a common message, common way of thinking about it, that people are aware of the tracking elements, and that they're working with the same data fields, measuring with the same metrics. So there's a commonality there that means that it's easier for us to track and to report, and that we have a more receptive reception when we're dealing with the different agencies. For the external world, I think this might be an opportunity to really publicize housing counseling more. So that our big challenge, as you all know, is not enough people come, and they don't come at the right time. So getting people in early and making it a natural thing to go to counseling in the same way that you think about buying a house, you go to a realtor. Maybe at this point it's when you think about making major housing financial decisions, you think about going to a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. And how do we get there? Well, one of the things that is an opportunity for the administration would be to figure out how to create a framework and do events around the country that would appeal and be recognized by the public, and start building up the reputation of housing counseling as a resource, and utilizing the fact that we're going to be certified soon, and that there's such a thing as a HUD-approved housing counseling agency and a HUD-certified housing counselor, and that's who you should be looking at, and how can that all be promoted? We brought this up with Secretary Castro in our meeting, and had a very good exchange on it. And then, as we talked about earlier, he was in Anchorage, Alaska, and went to the NeighborWorks office in Anchorage and spent quality time there. I'm not sure how much publicity we got for that, but I think in the future, if we can get more of those kind of getting out and in the field and seeing counselors in action, and including us in program descriptions, helps do that, and think about other things that the government can use to really promote the image of housing counseling. And we do have the advantage of this recent Fed study, which we posted, and I assume people all know about, and it really showed that there were very specific. It was done with a pool of clients from Clarify in Philadelphia, and they broke them out into two groups, and one group got a 2-hour educational session, the other one got a 2-hour educational session plus intensive housing counseling. And that group had greater improvements in their credit scores, had lower delinquencies, though the population in general had paid the mortgage on time, but really showed that they were a stronger buyer and performed better. This was all good news, and it's the kind of blind study that has a control group that everybody's saying was missing. So very helpful to that. And the Fed's interested in promoting it, and that might be a vehicle for it as well, trying to get the word out about how our work can work and work better. So let me just pause there. Were there any questions or thoughts that people had, Matthew?
There haven't been, other than a request to, if we have additional time, to discuss HAWK. Nothing. I'm hoping for some. What is the program about? Is it a grant account? Just, I guess, an overview of the HAWK program. So just to put that on your radar, if we do have some more time.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think we do have time. I'm not going to go through NCLR's effort to upgrade its technology. Lott has a great deal to say about this. It's very interesting stuff and a little bit eye-opening, but I'm not the authority on this, so I'm only talking about stuff I know about. So interesting question about HAWK. I mean, we've had people on the call, so I don't want to go in too much depth, but the baseline is that HAWK stands for Homeowners Armed with Knowledge, and there are actually 3 components, one of which is the back-to-work mortgage for people who have had or negatively impacted on the housing crisis and are back on their feet again, and there's a counseling requirement and then a manual underwrite by FHA on the loan. That actually cuts the time that you have on down to a year that you have on when it's normally 3 years on if you've had a bankruptcy or foreclosure, and it doesn't mean that it's counseling and you get the loan. You're still pretty heavily underwritten, but it's an opportunity to qualify. And our sense is that it's being underused now, so certainly if people have success stories on it, we'd love to hear about what's working and who the lenders are. And some of the biggest lenders are not participating, which is surprising, but so success would be interesting to know. I think what's gotten the most interest lately has been the announcement that of HAWK provision that's for pre-purchase and requires that people get counseling in 3 steps in the process of buying a house. And in the first 2 steps, which are before they've made mortgage application and between mortgage application and loan closing, you'll get a reduction in your mortgage insurance upfront fee. And so you'll get, I don't know the numbers of what they projected, and the final numbers we haven't seen yet because it's there was a comment period and we haven't seen the final rule. But that process creates an incentive for people to come to counseling. Obviously, it's very good to talk to people before they do a mortgage application, and that's where some of the financial decisions get made. That's really good to be in on. It was an interesting idea that the HUD people had to include a separate counseling session between application and closing, and that session The idea was that the front-end session was really aimed at getting people through the process and helping them understand what they need to do and what they can qualify for, and very much more nuts and bolts. The second one is once you've gotten into the application process and gotten yourself in there, this one emphasizes more what are the responsibilities of a homeowner. What do you need to know about taxes? What do you need to know about budgeting and maintenance and things like that that are geared towards the long-term sustainability. And the idea was do that once people are already through the application process. The third step was after closing that there be a post-purchase closing component, and for people that actually followed through on that, there would be a reduction in their ongoing mortgage insurance. That provision is people would then go to a post-closing counseling session and would get the sort of the more long-term sustainability kinds of components to the counseling session. So a nice package. They built in a kind of complicated way of the consumer paying up front and then some fee thing going through with the lender originator. I'm not sure where they'll land on that in the final version of it, but they really wanted to try to build in some a funding mechanism, but found they couldn't require the lender to pay for counseling in the early stages. So we'll see what the final version looks like when the final rule comes out, and no, I don't know when it will come out. We had thought, I think the goal had been that it was going to be out October 1, and I do know that at HUD that they have a lot on their plate, and they're struggling with trying to get it all through the system. There's a third component to HAWK, which will be around modification and delinquency counseling, and would either encourage or require people to get counseling in order to get a loan modified. So, do we have any other questions in the queue?
Yeah, and I just sent out a chat message to everyone. We do have a little bit of extra time, so feel free if you have any burning issues that you'd like us to discuss in the last 10 or so minutes we have. Feel free to submit them by the question box. We did have a question. We have a few coming in, but if there are any updates on counseling for high interest mortgages.
So I don't have any updates. We did have a working group working on some materials for that. I have to say we got caught up in the September-October rush of working with the administration and these initiatives, and I'm not sure how much we're going to be able to do between now and December 11th. There's a lot on our plate. But it's interesting. I'm hearing from more groups that they're getting calls around this, and so we really do need to ignite this again. I'm a little worried about all the pieces we've got in the air right now. So, but hopefully we'll get something going. But it may not be before December 11th at this point.
All right. We do have a couple others. I'll also add HMDA and the housing goals as possible topics. But is there any word on the HUD NOFO renewal?
So I have not heard anything new. I mean, well, let me go back. So it's a 2-year NOFO last year, so that for groups that were funded this last year, the score would apply for this year. So I think those are in place. The only question is if a new group wants to apply, and we had a pretty deep discussion about that with HUD in the meetings in September, and the bottom line there was that there was that if a group had not applied but could have applied before in last year, that they were not inclined to make that available to them, that the opportunity was really had passed for them. But if a new group had formed, or if a group was affiliated with an intermediary and that they wanted it to change, or the intermediary was no longer doing that activity, that they may get some options to do it. But they were still trying to figure that all out, and we're interested in our input on it. That answers the question.
Yeah. Is there any work being done to encourage, require servicers to join the Hope Loan Port?
Well, we're not doing any work on that. That's an interesting question. Well, I guess I can see both sides of the argument. So I'd be interested in hearing if everybody thinks that's something that we should do. I mean, the difficulty is having influence over these servicers, and the best we can think about is talking to Treasury about it. But I think that's a tough road. So one is, would we be effective? But two, I'm just interested. I know that groups have had some complex views about Hope Loan Port. Is that something that our community would like us to be advocating for? I always hope to know these things. So let us know.
At least one person says yes.
Okay, well that's good. That's good. You know, so if you have a dissenting opinion, express it, and certainly if you're in favor of it, you should do that. And let's think about that. And actually, if our person who's spoken out could identify those servicers that you would like to have on Hope Loan Port, the ones that you're dealing with, that would be great. That would be great to know.
There's a suggestion to maybe do a Survey Monkey on it, which we can definitely think about and possibly do.
So one thing I worry about is that are we asking enough of you all, or are we asking too much of you all? So we do these pretty regular Survey Monkeys. We do regular sign-on letters. We have had a request for quotes on principal reduction. I'm making decisions all the time about should we float this to the group or not, and worry that we are giving you too much, knowing that you all are very busy. On the other hand, it's high-impact work, and what we do is, and what you do to contribute to this makes a big difference. So I would love some feedback about what the workload is and the email traffic. We try to keep it interesting. So if it's not, you should tell us. That's always helpful. I mean, it's really helpful to have some dialogue on some of these things so we can do it better. Well, good. So everybody, please think about coming to the Leaders in Housing Counseling meeting on the 13th, on the 11th of December. It should be a great time. I think I think it'll be a great time to meet and work with your peers on this, on these kind of things. But it's also an opportunity to really engage with the administration and some of the leadership in the housing counseling world. Look out for a letter from us on DOJ and the Fire Spring webinar. As always, we really appreciate all the good work you're doing, and we're going to continue doing. Oh, one quick thing is we're going to need to reschedule the call in 2 weeks. We're going to have a conflict, I think, then, and we'll need to get out. If we do reschedule, we'll get out a new time and date for the call, but it'll be within a day or so of when that call was scheduled. All right. Well, good work, everybody. Thanks for your participation. We'll talk to you soon.